All right. So the next one, I need to talk to my wife. Now, this is weird. Who's getting this objection? Right? Are people getting these objections in real estate?
Maybe not as much. I guess it's, I mean, a proxy for I need to speak. There's another decision maker.
Higher authority. No. So I'm being facetious, right? So I need to talk to my wife. So I think there's a couple of different things. I think that fundamentally there are a couple of truths at hand here. First, because we're talking specifically about real estate, we got to understand more often than not, the wife is the actual decision maker.
Sure.
There are a lot of guys that I was fooled by over the years. Like, oh, I'm the decision maker. Okay, well, the guy said he's the decision maker. Why would he lie to me? Why would he lie about that? Turns out everyone lies about whether the decision maker or not. I think Chris Voss says, like, if they use the words we, probably them. If they say the word I, it's probably not them. Right? Like, people will specifically lie about whether they are the decision maker or not. As a matter of fact, if you ask someone, are you the decision maker? And they're not, they have to lie, because to admit that they're not is to admit that they're powerless.
Yeah. I mean, or if you're thinking in other sales cycles, it actually hurts you if they're not any. I mean, when I went to go buy that car cash, even though my wife had given me complete blessing to do whatever, when I was talking to the sales guys and the manager, I made my pregnant wife the villain in that conversation. She was the decision maker. I had no say in this because then they weren't arguing with me. They were arguing with the distant figure of my wife. I mean, it's such a powerful thing to not be the decision maker if you know how to do it right. So if you're asking, are you the decision maker? You're just shooting yourself in the foot in every which way.
Yeah, there's no way you win that question.
Yeah, it's not a good question.
So what do you do then when someone says, I need to talk to my wife about this?
The same way we have ways to set up the sales process before the end regarding price, regarding need to think it over, we should also have that same type of approach for, are you the decision maker?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we want to rephrase, because decision maker is, first off, it's a sales term. Like, it's a thing that
only salespeople say.
Only salespeople say. Like, if you hear a salesperson say on a call, and then we'll circle back at the end, like, that's a salesperson speak. I remember the first time I heard someone say, and then when we finish this up, we'll circle back and see if there's any way we can help you. I'm like, only inside sales reps say circle back on the phone. Real human beings don't talk that way.
Yeah.
Decision maker does not come up in day-to-day life. So a better question I usually ask, or if you want to make a labeling statement, we can talk about that too. But a better question usually is, hey, when we go through this, I'm curious, because this is sometimes can be kind of a big decision. Is there anyone else who's going to just have some questions about how this process is going to go? Or is there anyone else you're going to want to make sure that you run your thoughts by about this, right? Rather than going, can you make the decision? Are you man enough or not? I go, is there anyone else who might have some questions about this? Just so we can prepare to make sure that you can better answer them.
Yeah.
And we deal with that up front. And that third person, if there is one, is a looming part of the figure. And it's much easier to be honest, like, oh yeah, my wife might have some questions, because that didn't cede their authority as the decision maker. Of course she'll have questions, but she'll do what I say at the end of the day. Don't you worry about that. Sure she will.
Yeah.
But yeah, like so we want to try and discover if there are other decision makers without using the types of words or asking the types of questions that set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I think for us, right, if we're going to find out if there's a wife involved, we have to figure out, when we're establishing the rules, is she going to have final say or not? And, one of the way, if the guy says, oh, look, you don't have to worry about her. Like, I got this. The question I will ask specifically, you mean to tell me, if you and I agree today on a price, you don't even need to call her? And they're like, well, I need to call her. I was like, well, it seems readily apparent she is a decision maker, right?
Sure.
So we got to get her back on the phone. So one of the things, or reschedule the appointment. So, what we talk about a lot is, if someone says, I need to get my wife involved, you've got basically a business decision. You either want to run the appointment and refuse to make an offer, right? Get them emotional so that you can sell the idea of rescheduling an appointment, right? Or B, you leave right then and there, right? And you reschedule for another time. So one thing I would say the story I always like to use is like, hey, Ian, I'm just curious. Has there ever been a time, maybe in the last 2 to 4 weeks, where your wife asked you to do something and then you did it exactly how you thought she wanted it done and you still got in trouble?
There has.
Yeah. I don't want the same thing to happen here. So I don't suppose it makes sense where we can sit down with you and your wife so that we can answer not just your questions and answers or your questions and concerns, but all of her questions and concerns as well.
Sure, that makes sense.
Right, and that's all we're doing, right? Is we're just looking out for the guy's safety, right? Like you don't want to get in trouble again, right?
Yeah, and what's really key for the listeners in this is that what we're doing, why we bring this stuff up earlier in the call, is like if these are the objections, like we asked for a while and got like almost 50 submissions, and we're barely have 5. Basically, we've got 5.
That was the last objection.
Okay, that was it. We had 5 out of it, right? Out of the 50 submissions. Is that if you know that this is that common in real estate to get this type of objection, that you should have built this into the actual process. And I've heard other sales trainers talk about like talking about the product and asking questions. That's like the easy part. The hard part is like closing. That's when stuff's on the line. That's when the closers go in there and get it. Yeah, sure. But also part of the reason that is the case is because when it's like the quote unquote closing stage, emotions are high. People are familiar. They've been pitched things before. They've tried to buy things before. They've tried to sell. They've bought this home. Like they're familiar with this process. So when tensions are up, they're more likely to lie to you about, no, I got to talk to someone or decision maker rather than just being like, I'm actually not interested. This price doesn't work, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so why we're doing this earlier is because since people lie and people play games, earlier in the conversation, they're not as tempted to because it's not the default time when they're used to playing games and lying because they're not on guard because they don't feel like they need to. So it's why we push for a yes or no up front rather than at the end. At the end, I feel pressured. Oh, this is. I don't like the idea. I want to think it over. Of course they feel that because we didn't establish that when emotions weren't high. I only brought it up when emotions were high right at the end. Yeah. You're doing it wrong if you're pushing hard to deal with the objections when it's actually time to go in for the close because their emotions are up and they're more likely to be resistant.
Yeah, and Lance talked about it earlier. Zach talked about this earlier. We kind of, mentioned it in passing, but like our sales process is to get the prospect to tell us what they want.
Yes.
And if they're telling us exactly what they want, it's up to us to figure out whether we want to do it or not.
Exactly.
We're not making random unsolicited. We're not making random offers that we don't know where it's going to land.
Yeah.
Right? We see the target. It's got the red light. It's got the smoke. It's got the flares. We know what the target is. We know exactly where it is. And we got to decide, or we get to decide, whether we want to do it or not. Versus I'm going to fire my shot. I hope it lands.
Yeah, we're trying to play poker where everyone's cards are turned up but ours.
Yeah.
Like, that's the game we're trying to play. And when your process is, I run this blanketed process and just shoot out offers, you're not even seeing your own cards. You're blindfolded playing poker.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to blindfold yourself. If you do this right, you get everyone to turn their cards up.
If you enjoyed what you just watched, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another video.